Hello, my name is Rebecca and this is Taylor, and today we're going to be interviewing Mr. Andrew Turnbull of Cambridge and Arrows on October 28, 2010. We hope you enjoy listening to his stories.
Mr. Andy Turnbull is 1920 when you were born. What is your earliest memory as a young child?
My earliest memories, let me see. I was born in Scotland, and my earliest things were playing around. My mother had a little corner shop, and out in front was a little yard there, and I remember playing around in that front yard, and there was a light out in front, and we used to hang around the light a lot, us kids. Okay?
Are there any family stories told about you when you were a baby?
Oh, I expect there probably were, but I can't just remember them. While I was little. Oh dear, no, I can't remember back that far.
Can you share with us about your family while you were growing up?
Well, I was growing up, yes. We had a very close family. My mother and dad and my sister Jean. Yeah, we were a very close family, and we enjoyed each other's company, of course. And we did, as I say, get along very well. And you see, now what else was it? When I was growing up, and of course, when I was 10 years old, we moved from, we emigrated from Scotland to New Brunswick. This was a big move. This was a big thing in our family, because at that time, moving, this was 1939. Oh, pardon me. This was 1930 that we came over to Canada. And this was a very, very serious move at that time. And yes, this was a sort of a disruption while I was growing up. However, it was a good move. We enjoyed, there's been no regrets.
Can you share with us about how your mother and father supported your family?
Yes. In Scotland, my mother had a little shop, corner shop, and my dad was a contract farmer. And then we came to Canada and lived on the farm. And by dint of hard work, the Scottish work ethic, of course, was quite prevalent, because we all worked. We worked very hard, and we enjoyed working together, and we did very well. We had, at the time, you see, at this time too, this was the time of the Depression. Nobody had any money, so we bartered mostly, and this is the way we grew up. And we worked hard, and we got along very well.
What is one of your closest memories of your family?
Oh dear, the closest memories of the family. Mealtimes, of course, was the time we were all together in the evenings. And, well, this is when I was growing up, you mean? Oh, yes. Well, this is the thing, just our family together when we were having our meals, and usually on Sundays we were together a lot, and we had a lot of visitors and people traveling at that time. And this was one of the things that, in those days, that we did a lot of visiting. People visited us and we visited others and so on. This was something that we don't do now.
When you were growing up, did you have electricity?
We didn't have TV until, I think it was 1939 or something like that, or maybe later, but I don't quite remember, somewhere But we always had radio. We had battery radios. I remember our radios when we had 1,000-hour batteries on them and all of these kind of things. And we did enjoy our radio because at that time we had good programs. We had good stories and Lux Radio Theater and all these different things. And they were really interesting stories, and we enjoyed listening to that. It was a different way of life.
Did you have phones back then?
Oh yes, we had the farmer's line. This was a crank phone, and everyone on the line, of course, if you had a call, everybody listened. And it was a way of communication. It was an excellent method of communicating with the whole community.
How old were you when you went to work, and where did you work?
Oh dear, I was, I decided that I had grown up by the time I was 15, and I went to work in the lumber mill over at Gagetown and Reed's Mill. And I was a fairly big lad, so I thought I was grown up. So I did go to work, and I worked for a year or two there. But anyway, the chap who was the engineer, he came in the morning, and he had his newspaper under his arm, carpet slippers, and went down into his engine room, and he ran the engines all day. And I thought, now there's the ideal situation. There's what I would like to be when I grow up. And by seeing this and realizing what I would like to do, I realized also that I had to go back to school. So after a year or two, I did go back, and I went to the vocational school in St. John. And this is where I began my second-tier education.
Were there any events or people that led you to pursuing a particular career? What and who were they?
Well, yes, there was, really. Mr. Stanley Fanjoy had the garage, Cambridge garage. He was a mechanic. He was a real mechanic because he would innovate and make things different. And I was fascinated by the work that he did, and at every opportunity I would stop in and watch and see what he did. And he had, I would say, this was one of the reasons, one of the impressions that I got for career in engineering or in mechanics. I enjoyed working with mechanics. So that would be one of the people who inspired me to go into this machine and mechanic way.
How old were you when you started your family?
Oh, well, I was married. We were married in 1942, which is I was 22 years old.
What were some of the challenges or exciting events for you as you started out on your own?
Well, let me see. Oh, yes, probably the one event that sticks out is the being hired after we were in vocational school by a company in Montreal, and we proceeded to Montreal to work in the industry in Montreal. This was probably the highlight, one of the highlights from there. And from there, with Dominion Engineering in Montreal, this was at the start of the war, and we went into war industry. And while I don't know whether this is where I should carry on with this or not. Anyway, the war was going on. I was working. I had a very good job. And but the war was going on, and it was there was things happening that I felt I should take part in, and so I tried. Well, I went to apply to the Navy for entrance into the Navy, and after a little bit of requirements that I needed, I did join the Navy, and I joined the Navy as a petty officer as an engineer.
When did you meet your wife?
I met my wife in 1939, 40, somewhere in there. I met her in Montreal. She actually was from Brown's Flat, but her brother and I were good buddies, and had been for quite a long while. If he mentioned he had a sister, it didn't register. However, when she and her father came to visit in Montreal, that's when I met her, and it was game over.
Can you tell me about your education?
Yes, it's, you see now, went to the school down here in Cambridge. The school just went to grade 8. And if you wanted to go to high school, you had to go to Coles Island. So I went through to grade 8. That was it. And then, as I say, I went to work. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, I went back to school. I went to vocational and came through there. And that's where I received my secondary, was part of my secondary education. And I suppose I went to, possibly about 10 years down here to school altogether.
We heard a story about you taking a horse to
Oh, about taking the horse to school, yes. Yes, on a very stormy day. I was lighting the school fires at the time. So, yes, I rode Dan, that was the bay horse, bareback, with my books and a little roll of kindling, and went up to the school, started the fire, and turned the horse around, and he went home on his own. And he went right on home, and this was it. I lit the fires, and we had our day at school. Stormy day.
Did you ever get into trouble in school?
Certainly not. Yeah, I suppose I was just the same as everybody else, but we don't reflect on those things, do we?
What are some things you used to do growing up?
Oh, you see now, well, we'd skate in the wintertime, and we'd bike in the summer, and after a while we'd tear around old cars. And, oh yeah, we had a pretty good time growing up, and we made our own entertainment. We didn't have any rinks or anything, or gymnasium or anything to go to, so we made our own fun, and we enjoyed it. It was I think that growing up in those days were good. I thought it was very good. I don't regret a word of it, or a time of it.
Did you have any hobbies?
Oh yes, I have several hobbies. Woodworking was my hobby, and it became a full-time job. I became a cabinet maker by trade, but before that my hobby was woodworking, and still is. I still like to play around with woodworking. And the other one, of course, is gardening, and I have a little solarium out here in the house, and I enjoy watching the plants grow and keeping things alive. I have been accused of having a green thumb, so that's all right. I guess that covers that.
What kind of pets did you have?
Oh, we had pets, yes. We had horses, we had dogs, cats, and oh yeah, we liked our pets.
When did you own your first vehicle?
Oh dear, that was when I was about 15. About 15. This was the car, I bought a 1923 Star, and it had been laid aside for some time and was in quite good shape. And it was a really nice car. It was a soft top, open, and it had nearly everything that you have in the cars today, except that it was open. Didn't have any radio, didn't have any heaters, didn't have any... It did have air conditioning because there was no windows. And we had a lot of fun with it anyway. We enjoyed our running around with our car.
Have you had any adventures involving vehicles?
Oh, yes. Let me see now. Yes, I've had many adventures with the vehicles, from boats, cars, bicycles, motorbikes. Oh dear, let's not get into too many of these. Yes, I've had a lot of experiences.
How many stores were there back then?
There were 4 stores here in this little area, and they were quite active. They were very active. In fact, there was always quite a lot going on in our stores. There was F.W. Blier, Fred Blier's store down here. He had they had the post office, and he had the agency for the, I think it was Electro-Home radios at that time. And then there was Gordon Robinson's next to it, and Gordon had, it was a sort of a department store. Gordon, it was a big store. It was a big 3-story building, and they had a lot of materials in there, and of course it was a good hangout for everybody. And then the stores, then there was the covered bridge all the way across, which was another good place to for the young people to congregate and to race around on. And then, of course, at the narrow side, there were 2 stores there, the Les Crummel's and the Akerley store. And Akerley's was something of a hardware store, and the others were just general stores, of course. So yes, we did have a very active community, store-wise.
What are some of the things that happened in your community that you recall from childhood?
Well, yes. For instance, we had times when people were in difficulty. If it had a fire, everybody got together and they rebuilt, and people who were in trouble, they always managed to get around and do things to help them out. And for instance, when they were moving buildings, they'd move buildings by using horses in the old days, and they'd have a couple of strings of horses there and hook onto the building and haul it around. Now they built this. There was a building on the wharf, just at the edge of the wharf, and it was pulled up the road and then down across the fill, and this was one of the things, that was a big thing to happen in our community. And for instance, if there was someone who was ill, they'd get the firewood out, cut it up, stack it, do everything, and things like that. And these are the things that happened in the community, yes.
Have you traveled to other places?
Yes, we enjoyed traveling. Of course, in the Navy, I traveled in a lot of various and different countries. And then after the war, when I became a teacher, we had 2 months in the summer which we used for travel in an awful lot of cases. And yes, we traveled quite a bit to Europe, down from the Riviera, Gibraltar, Germany, France, all these different things. We did a tower trip some years. We did the Eiffel Tower, the Tower of London, the GP Tower in London, and we did most of the towers at the time. We did one in Ireland, and then we did the Husky Tower in Calgary, the Space Tower in Seattle, and then we traveled to. When I was a teacher, I completed my teaching in the community college in St. John, and I decided to carry on with with teaching, and we went to a third world country. I was offered positions in Cambodia, 2 places in Africa, Indonesia, and I chose the West Indies. I chose St. Lucia. And Doris and I went to St. Lucia. And from there, we traveled quite a lot because it was more or less central, and we had the time. So we traveled to South America, down all the way through from Venezuela, Cambodia, and of course down to Peru and Chile. And we traveled into the Andes, 400 miles back in the Peruvian jungle, to the lost city of the Incas, Machu Picchu, where we stayed for a little while and did some surveying around that area. And traveled to all of the Caribbean islands. And let me see now. And we did extensive travel in Canada. We had a motorhome. So we traveled in Canada and went out to the west coast and wandered in the mountains for a long time, and went down the coast, down through Oregon and back across the United States through the Midwest. And, oh yes, we traveled. Yes, we did.
I understand that you were a teacher. Can you tell us about your career and experiences?
Well, yes. I didn't start my teaching career until I was 35 years old. Prior to that, I had been in the industry in furniture factory. I was partner manager of a furniture factory, and then I decided to go into teaching. And I taught in the high school in Minto for 9 years, and then I had got an appointment to the community college in St. John, which was then the Technical Institute, and it had just opened, and we started there as the first teachers in the area, and I taught in that area for 12 years, and during that time, of course, we went through, we were teaching mostly adults, and teaching them the trade, industrial. This was millwork, carpentry, cabinet making, and related subjects, of course. So then I decided that I would like to move on a bit, because I had some years to put in. So I decided I would check into the advent of going to a third world country. Okay, yeah, so I went to Ottawa and talked to the people in CETA. And from there, of course, it progressed to the point where they make a sort of a background thing of your expertise, and they post that, and then when there's an area that require that expertise, then you're given the opportunity to reply to it. And I did get several. As I mentioned before, we had 2 or 3 from Africa, 2 from Africa, 1 from Kenya, and 1 from Cambodia, Indonesia, and the Indies. So we chose the Indies. Now let's see, where do we go from there?
Mr. Turnbull, can you tell us about the healthcare system when you were growing up?
Well, yes, we had good care. I think it was quite good. It was the doctors would come to the house if it was an emergency and look right after things. Now, I remember this mother took very ill, and it was in the fall. In the winter time, she took very, very sick, and she had to be taken to the hospital. The roads, of course, at that time were not plowed. The train went from Fredericton to St. John on Wednesdays. That was once a week. And the thing to do, of course, if you were going to get to St. John, was to try to get to the train, and this was it. So they got the team ready, and they got the sled fixed up, put hot bricks in it and everything, and buffalo robes, and they got mother into the sled, and away they went. Going through the Cherry Hill Road, it wasn't plowed, and the horses were plunging through the snow and all this kind of thing. And it took them longer than they thought. By the time they got to Gagetown, across the ice to the Gagetown, the train had gone. No more train till next Wednesday. Well, they went to the hotel in Gagetown, and the people there, of course, were very concerned about all this. And I forget the man's name. I should remember it, but I can't remember it as well. He decided that, or he suggested that this chap who had a car and he could travel on the ice would be the best method of getting this emergency to St. John. So they contacted this chap, and he said he would go if Barry Hector, the man who ran the ferry, he was a colored gentleman, and if he would go with him to show him exactly where the ice was safe. So this is what they did, and they took my mother to Public Landing and from there to St. John, where she underwent several operations and came home in the spring. And at that time, she, as I said, she was very, very ill. And by being treated this way, she lived till she was 85 years old. So yes, we had good care.
Can you share some interesting facts about your life?
Interesting facts. I think of the Canadian Legion. I was instrumental in getting the Canadian Legion here. Fred Cochran and I got the Legion started here. And some of the highlights, of course, is the offices I held during the years we had the Legion. One of the things that I feel that important was that I was responsible for getting the centennial or the cenotaph over in Waterboro at the Legion there. I decided that this was going to be a project that I was going to look after, and we have it, and it's there. That's one area. Some of the other areas is belonging to some of the groups that were here that were organized and were here. Now, I didn't get into the council here, but I was a background noise at times. And the church was another highlight, of course, that we were good churchgoers, and let's see now, is there the things that I like to do, if there was a possibility of helping to do it as quietly as possible, and some of those things that are here, I don't know what else to say about the highlights, but
Tell us about your 90th birthday party.
oh yes, that was one of the highlights, of course. I had no idea that there would be so many people. I thought, oh yeah, it'd be nice to have a few friends, but there was something like 140, and it was marvelous. It really was very, very good. I met people who I hadn't seen for some time, and renewed friendships and so on. And to reach that particular state of being in life, and at 90 years old, and looking back over this period, yes, it was a very, very interesting and very happy time for me to be there at that time.
I understand you have made contributions to the communities. Can you share about these projects?
Yes, I would like to do more, but yeah, we've made probably the entrance to the library is one, and the Turnbull parlor is another, and one or two others, but we won't talk about them. And there's one in the works right now that we're working on.
And that concludes our interview with Mr. Andrew Turnbull of Cambridge and Narrows. This is Taylor, and I'm Rebecca. Thank you for the opportunity, A Legacy of History project.